You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
You're listening to Mission Log the Orville, an episode-by-episode discussion of the adventures of the crew of the USS Orville.
Welcome to the supplemental episode of Mission Log the Orville. This week we have Joel McNeely, who, if you're watching this, is right below us. Joel is a graduate of the University of Miami and the Eastman School of Music. He composed for Walt Disney Television, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, Police Story 3, Vegas Vacation, American Dad, A Million Ways to Die in the West, The Orville, and so much more. I'm not going to go for it. We'll discuss Joel's influences and his background and what it's like to be a composer on the Orville, if he wants to tell us. I'm Jessica Lynn Verdi.
And my name is Mike Richards. Mission Log the Orville is a conversation that starts with you. So that depends on your participation. Share your thoughts, ideas. Tell us what you would like to talk about that we missed at ML_the Orville on Twitter, Mission Log Pod on Facebook, or you can email us at missionlog-theorville at roddenberry.com. If you're watching this on the Roddenberry YouTube channel, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode.
So don't be mean. We'll call them out. We'll call them out when they're mean.
Oh, we have called them out when they're mean.
Well, actually, I feel like the biggest criticism we've gotten is that we're too woke. Joel, would you think of yourself as woke?
Oh God, I hate that term so much.
It's become like offensive, right? You can't.
It's just nothing. It means nothing. Are my sensibilities, leaning towards, compassionate government and, treating people with respect? Yep. I don't know if that's woke, but.
It's been weaponized as a term where it could have been just helpful, and now it's definitely something someone will say to you when you just don't agree with them.
Yeah, or just aware of your surroundings, aware of things that are going on. That's all it is.
You know what? If I had my druthers, I'd be asleep all the time. So anyway, that would be how I would prefer to go. Well, we're so excited to have you here, Joel, because it's not just, it was an eventuality we would have you on. Honestly, Mike is our music guy. Every time we talked about a specific episode, he was really, what we learned really early on, because most people know Family Guy and all that, is how important the music is to Seth and how important a huge orchestra is. And so then that becomes clear to us that there's a lot going into the composition for each episode. And so today we're celebrating the release of season 3's musical soundtrack. Yay!
And it was not easy.
I was just going to say, how come it took so long?
Well,
you don't have to answer that.
you have 11 episodes. All of them have at least 30 minutes of music, if not 40. And so totaled up, there was about 7.5 hours total of score.
Wow.
Then we whittled that down to 4 hours and 40 minutes, 4 hours and 40 minutes. Some 70-some tracks. And getting people online, on board with releasing a television soundtrack that long, they were like, "What are you talking about? You want to release a 4-hour?" Ultimately, we all got on the same page, and Hollywood Records has been great, and we got it done.
Well, I don't want to oversell anything. Just said I'm the music guy. I have no formal training. I have no background in music. I don't play an instrument.
You don't need to be to appreciate it.
I know what I like, and I appreciate, and I love how much a part of the show is. It's world building. Yeah. It's character building. It sets the tone. It sets the mood. And coming from a background of having Star Trek as my fandom, the original series had some very strong music in it. That's just iconic. Next Gen, the euphemism that's always used is the music was like wallpaper. It should be in the background. You should know it's there, but it shouldn't really get in anybody's way. So to have this sort of strong messaging come through the music was, to me, just so refreshing and such a great part of the show.
I'm glad you think so. A whole lot of people worked very, very hard to make that happen.
We chatted briefly a couple of months ago. Our producer, John Champion, and myself and a few other people from Roddenberry Entertainment, my wife included, went to see Seth MacFarlane perform at Vibrato. And you composed that show. And,
I was right behind you, right?
He very politely tapped me on the shoulder and said, I may have to lean over you to compose one song where... to conduct one song where I have to make eye contact with Seth, and I was like, hey, "Do whatever you want, man. I'm just."
You think you could have gotten front row? Whoa.
They have since built me a little podium now, so I'm about 9 inches off the ground, so that helps.
But I sent you a little, just a Twitter DM the next day saying, "Great to meet you," and enjoyed the show. And you said it was the hardest you ever worked in your life, I think was the quote that you gave. True statement, or?
Oh no, it's certainly not the hardest I ever worked in my life. Those shows can be really tricky. There's so much kind of plasticity to those songs, and they're just filled with potholes where you can stumble.
Right. I'm sorry too. That was my fault. To be clear, working on the Orville, you said was the hardest you worked in your life.
That is accurate. Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah.
And worth it?
Oh God, yes.
Great.
Yeah.
That was a great episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Joel.
Thank you. Let's kind of jump back into. I'm talking to you right now from Indianapolis. I understand you were born in another Big Ten state. Are you from Minnesota? Is that accurate?
No. I'm
okay.
From Madison, Wisconsin. I'm a Badger.
Ah, okay. Excellent.
Go Badgers.
And how did you end up at the U?
Well, I left home. I left Madison when I was 14 to go away to high school, to an arts high school in northern Michigan called Interlochen Arts Academy. And Interlochen at the time, was a very small, it was a larger summer camp, a couple thousand kids in all of the arts disciplines. But during the year, it went down to about 400 kids, grades 9 through 12. And I went there to really get serious about studying music. And there were a lot of kids there that were way more advanced than I was. But I worked very hard while I was there. And there was kind of a well-worn path from Interlochen down to the University of Miami of people, especially in the jazz school, which is what I was playing. Before me, so I knew of previous graduates had gone down there, and so when you go to audition, you stay with somebody that went to Interlochen, and it was almost like going down there. You were just kind of continuing at Interlochen. It had that kind of feel to it.
Oh yeah.
And Miami was and still is just a ridiculously fine jazz school. I mean, at the time the players were just like you could never imagine. When I went down there, do you know who Jaco Pastorius is?
I do not.
Legendary bass player, maybe the greatest bass player ever lived. Played with Weather Report, and Jaco was just down there, teaching at the U. Pat Metheny, the great guitarist, had been teaching there a couple of years before I got there. There were just all these seriously great players, and you got to play in school ensembles that then went out and did professional gigs. So, by the time I was a junior, I was going to school during the day and then going to work to play with Tony Bennett 6 nights a week.
Wow.
Or Melissa Manchester, Stephanie Mills. I got to play with Sinatra once.
Wow.
And making a living or playing at a club. There were so many live music clubs back then. So yeah, it was a real scene. It was. I did not enjoy living in Miami. It's much different now, but I really learned a hell of a lot there. Yeah.
I think that's what's so interesting about like the jazz culture too, is that you just have all these greats. They're either playing at a club or they're coming to the college and just here's how I do it, and then moving on. So how do you end up accumulating your style after learning from so many different people?
Well, gosh, I sort of truncated my jazz education because, my niche was that I was a flute player first and then a sax player. And, there are some great flute players that play saxophone, but that's generally not a strength. If you're a sax player, flute, they play flute, but just okay. And since I started on flute, that was my niche. That was, I got gigs because they said, well, he can play all the flute parts. But I had decided early on, by the time I went to Interlochen, that I wanted to write film music. And that was always the plan. And my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife of 38 years, said to me, 'cause she came to a club in Coconut Grove called Bananas, and I was playing in this really cool big horn band. It became the Miami Sound Machine, actually. All the guys in that went on to become the Sound Machine. And I was playing in that club. And she was in the club, and, people were blowing cigarettes, smoke in our face. And, and she's like, this is really cool. What are your plans for the future?
Wow.
And I don't know. I haven't thought of it. Well,
not mincing any words.
Yeah, why don't you think about it? Well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to write film music. Well, where can you go study that? Well, there's really only one program, and it's kind of at Eastman, but they only take 2 people a year. And I said, well, how do we get an application?
That's actually really awesome, though, because the converse can happen, too, especially with the arts, where you meet somebody and they really don't feel like you have a future, so they're looking for you to get a cushion job doing something else while you go play jazz or whatever. So obviously you married the right woman who went, let's find out how to maximize your gift and make the most out of it.
She's a great musician. She's a phenomenal musician. Still is.
What's her thing?
She's concertmaster of the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. And she teaches at USC and the Colburn School. She's something of a badass, and
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So did your kids have any chance of not being musicians?
Neither is.
Really?
My son is a fantastic athlete. He went to D1 school at UC Santa Barbara for soccer. He was a starting goalkeeper for Santa Barbara for several years, and then he went on to he went to Georgetown and then went on to become a sports agent, and now he's working in tech. And my daughter is a beautiful singer, but she has gone on to do other things in her life, and but she still sings for the joy of it. And I'm perfectly content. I just wanted them to love music, to grow up having an appreciation for it, and they both do. So there's all kinds of ways to love music and not be a professional musician.
Totally.
That is an amazing family story. So who's a bigger deal in the family? You or your wife is in the music industry or entertainment?
Oh, her for sure. Well, look at it this way: if you drive down the street, pretty much anywhere in LA right now, on lampposts, you'll see banners with full headshot of her.
Come on.
Advertising the chamber orchestra. And
I've seen those. That's awesome.
Yeah, you can't drive around town and see my headshot from a lamppost.
That is amazing. How old were you when you realized you wanted to write music for movies? Because Interlochen started at 9th grade?
Yeah. I was a kid. I've told this story a lot, so I'll kind of truncate it because people that have heard me talk have heard this story. But I knew I wanted to be a musician from the time I could talk. I think in certain respects, and I know in my case, you're just born that way. I mean, honestly, there was nothing else to do with my life. And I was pretty good at it. I could pick it up easily. I could pick up instruments and learn them. pretty easily. So I started playing a lot of started with the recorder, which, I just devoured the books and became pretty good pretty quick. And then I started the flute, and then I started the saxophone, and then I started the bass, electric bass, and then I started the clarinet, and then and I played piano all along. It was just what I wanted to do. And my dad was an unusual guy. He was a professor of communications at the University of Wisconsin, specializing in playwriting. And he was a bona fide playwright. He had sold many scripts, and actually had a fair amount of things on national television, some plays that he had written. And then by the time I was 12, I think 11 or 12, he had broken into Hollywood pretty solidly. He was doing episodic television, starting with The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and then going to Marcus Welby, MD. And then as a spin-off of Marcus Welby, MD, they gave my dad a show, said, you take the spin-off, you executive produce it. And we lived in Madison, and he was just bopping back and forth, very unusual life between being a college professor and a Hollywood writer and producer. But we all really wanted to stay in Madison, and to his credit, he made that happen through traveling. But this show came up. It was called Owen Marshall, Counselor at Law, and he was going to do it for a year. So we decided, all right, we'll all go out for a year, and then we'll decide. That was 7th grade for me. And during that year, as they were getting the pilot shot, or they had the pilot shot, and he hired a composer to do the pilot episode and the main title. And the composer he hired was Elmer Bernstein, who even then I was a fan of his. His score to Kill a Mockingbird. I remember I was 8 years old, just falling in love with that. And Elmer was then and was a huge deal in my life. So I went to Universal Studios on the day, and there was this orchestra sitting there with their stand lights in the dark and this big movie screen, and they were projecting my dad's movie on it, and Elmer was conducting this orchestra live to the movie. And my dad had told him that I was interested in being a musician, and he had a set of scores prepared for me on the podium, and he already had like a little chair for me sitting next to him on the podium. And so I got to sit there, like right next to Elmer, and watch him conduct this orchestra and look at the scores. And, he single-handedly just picked me up and said, okay, that's what you're going to do for a living. And, they talk about lightning bolt moments, but yeah, that was seminal in changing my life.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful story.
That's what I've wanted to do all along. And I'm grateful that I got to do it,
I love stories like that. I mean, I feel very fortunate that I knew what I wanted to do from the time I was about 5, 6, 7 years old. And I never, my brother, who is in every way as smarter, more talented than I am, just never really found that one thing he wanted to do. And he's got a great life. His career has kind of been, not possibly as fulfilling. So I love that getting a chance to live your dream and know what you want to do from
it's a gift, and not having to make that decision. I've always thought that. Margaret was the same way. She started the violin when she was 3. She was playing concerts by the time she was 6. I mean, like solo concerts. And so, I'm very fortunate to have life say, okay, here's your direction, off you go.
Yeah, it does make things just a little bit easier. It doesn't mean success is guaranteed for you.
No.
But something about this culture too is you have to find the thing you're good at. Your brother's probably perfectly fine, Mike, but he's like
he's doing fine. He's a couple of cruises. His wife's a traveling nurse. They got plenty of money. He's retired early. He's doing fine. Just career wise, I feel like he just kind of worked as a means to an end and not as an area of fulfillment. I think it's a gift, and that people who do know what they want to do, who find their passion, are lucky. Was my only point.
Totally.
I want to ask you a little bit about a year ago. I was working on a pretty large project at work that had to do with leadership and mentorship and leadership style. And we compared one style of leadership to kind of reading a recipe book. and we compared another style of leadership to jazz, to being able to modify your style based on the people around you. Sometimes that might be autocratic, sometimes it might be democratic, sometimes it might be collaborative, sometimes you might just be the helper, sometimes you just stay the heck out of the way because everybody knows what they're doing. And the analogy that was brought up, and I saw this for the first time, from some words that Jack McKinney spoke to the Lakers when he was taking over as the head coach there, was that their offense was pretty much like a cookbook. He wanted them to be jazz musicians. Is there, from that conversation, I felt like jazz musicianship was really a higher form of musicianship than other kinds. Is that true? Is it false? Is it?
Yeah, it's not higher for sure. It's different. To me, jazz certainly has its own language, but every style of music has its own language, and the different disciplines are not as different as one would think. There are certain basics which, number one, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know theory. You have to understand harmony. You can play jazz by ear, but you really have to understand the building blocks. And then, the thing that distinguishes jazz from other kinds of music, number one, is improvisation. But there's all kinds of improvisation in all kinds of music. I saw this great clip of Frank Zappa today, and somebody had asked him, what do you think of when you play a guitar solo? And he said, well, I'm different than a lot of people in that a lot of guys will go up on stage and they've practiced that solo and they've polished it and they've got it and it'll be great and it'll be the same every night and it'll be really impressive. I go up there, I've got basic knowledge of my instrument and I know pretty much how long my space is, and that's all I know. And he said, and for that period of time, how did he put it? I get to decorate that period of time.
Oh,
whoa.
And, I thought that's a marvelous way to talk about improvisation, because you have a basic, your instrument, your harmony, and then you just off you go. But it's not that different than composition. And I realized that. It took me a long time to realize that because I was always getting in my own way. Jazz, of course, in improvisation is pretty much your first thought, your first instinct. You play what you think, and out it comes. And if it's not good, then you go a different direction. If it is good, you build on that. I started as a composer, and it was like, it's got to be great. Sorry, I turned on Siri here. Go away. It's got to be great. So I have to really analyze it, and I've got to really trouble over every note, and I've got to just make myself sick. And I realized about, 15 years ago that if I just suspended all of that and treated it like jazz, what is my first instinct? I'll just go with that, okay? I will be disciplined and I'll just go with my first instinct. I would say 80% of the time that served me well. Then there was that 20% where it's like, nah, got to go back and fix that. But it was kind of freeing in that you have this scene and you just let yourself go and you let yourself think, what is a way to decorate this? What comes to mind? What comes to mind? Something could be the littlest thing, a snippet of melody, a little bit of harmony, some orchestration, but just the littlest thing to hang on to. You grab that, and then you start building on that and building on that. Suddenly, you've got 8 bars written, and that propels you, and you keep kind of decorating as you go. So, I think of jazz and classical and country and folk. I think they have more in common than differences. Yeah.
Thank you. As you got into the industry, you got going. What was your first big break?
The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles.
Oh yeah.
Without question. Yes. I had no idea why I was getting put up for this show, but my agent called and said, you got to go meet George Lucas at the Bel Air Hotel. He'll be in this room. He's expecting you at this time. And
wow.
I went, and I spent about an hour and a half with him telling me about the series and really filling me in on the episodes. And he goes, now you're going to be doing this episode, and I want you to do this one. Lawrence Rosenthal, the great composer, he was writing the main title. He would do half the episodes, and he started telling me, I want you to do the Battle of Verdun. I want you to do Africa with Albert Schweitzer. And I suddenly realized, as I'm in the middle of the meeting, this is not an audition. I've got the job.
Whoa.
I'll never forget the car ride home, thinking, holy crap, this is going to change my life.
I'm surprised you could concentrate on driving the car.
And how do I do it? This is way above my skill level, way above. So there was panic and, flop sweat, all of that. But I just went to work, and I worked really, really hard. And Young Indiana Jones every show was a different movie, a different character, historical character in time, or a different event like the Battle of Verdun, and required its own separate movie score. There was very little that kind of translated between episodes. So it was like boot camp, writing tons of music, going and conducting tons of music. I really learned to be a good conductor by doing that. And yeah, it was like 2.5, 3 years of just the most amazing training in so many different styles of music.
This is all I can think about is how much were you guys allowed to use from the original score? Because that's got to be a challenge too, is kind of keeping it in the light.
George didn't, yeah, it's a good question. George didn't want us to use it. This is indie. It was bifurcated into indie at 8 and indie at 17. And we go back and forth. There was only one time when we did an episode that had bookends with Harrison Ford. And then he comes to it was the Gershwin episode, and he's out getting chased or something like that, and he hears a soprano saxophone, and it takes him back. I remember when I heard the soprano saxophone, I knew this guy, George Gershwin, and then we're off into the show. But so for those bookends, I used John Williams' Indiana Jones score, quoting it and using material from it. But George wanted this to be its own thing, separate.
So that's got to be its own challenge to, obviously, to what you said, learning how to just be in the moment, look at what you're looking at, choose where to take off from, and then go with that. But you got to have not just, this is my first big job. I've got a legacy of music behind this as well too. There's got to be some intimidation there.
Oh, no question. The biggest challenge, other than the long hours of that job, was not looking sideways. Just not like, holy crap, what am I doing? What am I doing here? And just trying to focus on the task at hand. Today I have to write this scene, And then, as I started to do some shows and got a little bit of experience under my belt, then it started getting really fun. And we traveled all over the world working with different orchestras. We went to Munich, we went to London, we went to Perth, Australia. It was crazy.
Amazing.
Super fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a real high pressure situation, but in the best way too. I kind of love that you didn't have to audition also, because you're like, I guess I'm good enough for this job too. It kind of takes out some of the doubt.
No, I never thought that I was good enough. I just thought, holy crap, I better get good enough.
Right, totally.
So clearly you were on, or were put on, Steven Spielberg's radar by someone. Do you think it was just badass agenting, or was it?
No, and it was actually George Lucas.
I'm sorry.
But no, I was told that John Williams was aware of my work and had floated my name. And then, of course, Lawrence Rosenthal was the first composer they brought on. So yeah.
Yeah, that's
Changed
very
my life.
cool. So is there somebody in your life or like a 8-year-old that you let sit next to you that went, I want to compose films? Do you have the opportunity now that you are where you are in this career to kind of go, oh, let me see what this kid can do, or let me give them their big break?
Not in that sense, not that young for sure. I've done some teaching at Interlochen, gone back there and taught, which is always cool. And then I taught at USC in the Thornton School, in the film music program there for 6 or 7 years, and worked with some really super talented young composers, many of whom are big names now. I do enjoy that. I do enjoy teaching. It's really rewarding.
I bet it is. Just that chance to kind of pass it on to the next generation and pay it forward, if you will. We're here mostly to talk about the Orville. We always like to get
let's talk about the Orville
from you. How did you? I watched an interview that you did earlier on, and to try to prepare for this. And if I'm correct, and I haven't been yet tonight, the way I read it was you got brought in. You chatted a little bit about Family Guy, and then were brought in to work on American Dad later on. Is that kind of how it went down?
That how Seth and I started working together?
Right.
Yeah. Yes, I went in for a meet and greet meeting on Family Guy, and ultimately didn't wind up doing that, of course. And then around, 2008, I think, 2007, I got a call saying, are you interested in doing American Dad? And then Seth called up and said, hey, let's have lunch. And we went out and we talked and we had lunch and we had a great time and talked about, pretty much everything but American Dad. We talked about film music. He's got this unbelievable encyclopedic knowledge of film music. His iPod is it should be a national treasure. He's got like every single unreleased film score ever made on there. You can say, we were at dinner the other night and I just started working on an American Dad that's a Scooby-Doo takeoff. Scooby-Doo American Dad episode. Mm-hmm. Real fun. And I said, have they commercially released the Scooby-Doo scores from the late 60s? And he goes, no, but I have original recordings from the recording sessions here on my phone, and in 5 seconds he's playing from 1966 from the Scooby-Doo sessions, because he worked at Hanna-Barbera, and he went into the library when he was there and managed to get these things.
That's smart.
He's got this fabulous knowledge about film music, and I always delight in him teaching me things, about film scores. So I started working on that, and I came to his Christmas party one year and I just sort of sat behind the mixing console when the orchestra was playing and Seth was singing, and I was just blown away with his singing. And I said to him, which I'm sure many people have said, you've got to do a record. Why aren't you doing a record? And I think about 6 months later, phone rang and he called and said, you want to do a record? There have been so many amazing adventures since then of just all kinds of different fun, interesting, weird, different things. I love the variety of working with Seth, always doing something completely different than the last time.
I think that that's one of the things we realized too, especially getting to interview everyone that's been a part of the Orville process, is he really does have a high respect for those that are masters of their craft, but it's got to be especially good to work. Well, I'm sure there's a double-edged sword of working with someone who knows so much about what you're accomplishing for him, and then it's got to be good and bad, that because he wants so much from you. I'm not suggesting that it's hard, that you won't deliver, but he probably has more keen notes than other people do, I would
without
imagine.
Question.
Yeah,
without question. A higher bar than, I've said this many times, it's like working with a filmmaker who's also a composer. Because he does have those ears. He knows he's a fine musician, and he knows what he wants, and in many cases he, like when I've written something and he's hearing it a different way, he'll sit down at the piano. A couple times
Wow.
he sat down at the piano and played something for me. When the ship is flying off like this, what about this? And he records it into his phone and sends it to me, and I was like, wow, well, absolutely, I'll put that in.
I think that says something about you, though, too, being able to collaborate as well, because you can also choose to be covetous over, well, I don't know if I want someone's input that way.
No, that's the fun part. It's always interesting because, for me, the job on the Orville was meeting his expectations, pleasing his sensibilities. I'd send off a 4 or 5 minute cue, and he generally gets back right away. This is fantastic, or I have a couple notes. So I send off a 4 or 5 minute cue, and I don't hear something for an hour, and I'm like, oh God, oh God, he hates it. And
I'm losing my job tonight.
He's looking for a new composer.
And he was just busy on something else. But no, it is. I think all of the composers, the 4 of us, felt this was a really special project because, again, the bar was set so high. The expectations were so high. You can't phone in anything. And I had to learn to write. Well, that's a whole separate thing, but I really had to learn to write for the Orville season 1 and 2. I was finding my way. I didn't really know the language. Certainly for the first season, I was struggling. Second season, I got a kind of a hold of what he was hearing and what he was wanting. And then by the third season, I felt like I was in the zone.
Well, that doesn't sound uncommon for everyone behind the scenes, though, for season 1, too, because he had the idea of what he wanted, but Fox wanted something different. And,
right.
It's not a universe that didn't know what it was, but the audience took a second to figure out what it was,
well,
too. So
yeah, but
challenge.
we all in every part of the show were finding our way for the first season. Matters of tone, in the scripts, matters of balance of comedy versus drama, matters of
The heart. Totally.
Yeah, the heart.
That's very interesting. I know I've got sci-fi questions to ask you, Mike. What's on your mind?
You mentioned working with the with Andrew, John, and Kevin. And I was curious how. I watched the show from week to week. I always mention who composed the music for it, as well as who directed, who wrote. And I can hear cues from different folks, but the music is incredibly consistent from episode to episode across composers. How do you? It doesn't. In other words, it doesn't sound like I'm listening to a different show.
Right.
It sounds like I'm listening to the Orville, no matter which of you composed the music that week. How do you maintain that consistency and that standardization, I guess, across different folks?
Yeah, it's great that you noticed that because that is the case. And, we all worked in our own silos. We had nothing to do with each other during the show. We weren't a team. We were each doing our own episodes. No, that's all Seth. He painted the picture. He took examples of music and say, here's something like I'm thinking something like this, or for here, once we get into that, wouldn't it be something like this would be better. And he had that kind of overarching vision of all of the music. So as he directed an episode, he also directed the scores in kind of pointing us in the direction that he wanted us to go, which is why I think, when you listen to like the season 3 soundtrack, there are real similarities, and I didn't hear any of their scores until they hit the air.
Wow,
So,
that's really saying something.
yeah.
I mean, it's nice. I think that's why something that Mike is so concerned with, and rightfully so, is the leadership quality that ends up giving us this show. That he knows how to let people go do what they're good at, and also knows how to tie it all together to make sure it's cohesive. I actually wanted to pick your brain about something a little bit different. I don't know if you've heard any of the criticism on the Marvel movies, who seem to be afraid to give strong choices when it comes to music and composition. Is that something you've heard of or are aware of, that's a criticism?
No, I haven't heard that. I don't really pay a lot of attention to kind of what's said about different movies. I think everybody has their own job, and a composer's job is to give the filmmaker what they want. And Marvel certainly has established, just like we established, a certain kind of, here's the groove, and this is the groove we're working in. And I just feel lucky that I found this groove with a man whose musicianship I so respect, where last season 3, I decided at the beginning, I've been doing this for a long time, and I started looking at the shows, and they were really good, and I thought, I've never said to myself, how good can you be? What's the very best you can make something? And I made a little deal with myself at the beginning of the season that I was going to try and outwrite anything I'd ever written before. And I didn't even tell anybody, really. I told Seth after the fact, but I just wanted to listen to the music afterwards and go, yeah, I really did take a step up on this. And that in its own way made it really special. Because I listen back to those cues, and it takes me back to the writing of it and where I was and how hard it is. It's just hard work. So many long hours. It's backbreaking almost. But the old quote, I hate writing, I love having written. That's really true.
Well, when Seth was on our show, he said, I think people are going to look at season 3 and see that it's the season where we swung for the fences. Yes. And I think your effort was very much instrumental, pun intended, with that.
Who's the improver now?
And another thing that Seth told us was that throughout his career, he's always, whenever he's found the right person or the right people, he makes sure he continues to work with them over and over and over again.
Yeah.
American Dad, Million Ways to Die in the West, The Orville, Ted. So obviously you're one of those folks that he trusts to do what his vision looks to be done, and that is amazing. When you listen to the season 3 soundtrack, did you listen to it from top to bottom since it's been released, or okay?
No. I'm too close to it. I am not going to sit down and listen to 4.5 hours of Orville music. As much as I love the show, it's like saying if you work in an ice cream factory and you're going to come home from work and eat ice cream for dinner. I mean, it's you're too close to it. Yeah. I've listened to my stuff a couple times, and then I've kind of gone through and listened to my colleagues' work and kind of just spot checked, and I have not listened to the whole thing, but I think the level's remarkably high, very consistent.
And the four of you are equals among. Is there a hierarchy to the four of you, or just four working in silos?
Well, it was Seth assigns episodes. Okay. So yeah.
And what do you have to work with when you are writing for that episode? Do you have principal photography? Do you have script?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a picture that is close to being locked. That the edit is signed off on, and they're not going to change anything. That's where I come in. Film scoring, music is one of the last processes. It's basically the second to last process in terms of sound. Obviously, the computer, the graphics go on almost till the thing airs.
Wow.
But in terms of sound, we score, and then the mix happens with dialogue and sound effects and music, and that's it. So I get a fairly finished picture. The things that aren't finished are effects, computer graphics, all of that. They can be, like a storyboard almost. It's funny. It took me about 6 to 8 weeks to write an episode because I was really taking my time. And in that time, they get the picture more finished, and by the time I get to be ready to record it, I go into the studio, and they've got the picture almost finished. So the first time I'm seeing those graphics is at my recording session. And there have been scenes like in show 11, there was a scene where my whole experience of scoring this very long, delicate scene was they were standing in front of a green screen, right? And he just said it's going to be this really kind of beautiful but barren-looking planet, and that you'll see. But it was just the two actors in front of a green screen, and that's how I wrote it. And then we get to this session, and I see this gorgeous landscape and everything, and I said it's kind of like Christmas, when I get to see the thing finished.
That's amazing, and that's when all that hard work that you said pays off. Hate the work, hate writing, love having written. Is that how you said it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's got to be nothing like that, though. The sense of accomplishment, because I what I'm getting from the way you describe your process, which little bit, you probably want to be a perfectionist, but you've learned how to sidestep that in order to get the job done. Does that sound about right? Or have you learned how to become a perfectionist that gets the job done?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you can be a perfectionist and not get in your own way. I think the openness, being open to it all comes back to me to improvisation, to jazz improvisation. I'm not going to sit there before I take a solo and figure out what I'm going to do in advance. So I'm looking at this scene, and I'm going to react to this scene, and I'm going to latch on to those first instincts, and I'm not going to second and third guess that. Then, once those ideas are formed, and you start to craft those ideas into something, into a cue, that's where the perfectionism comes in. And
that
then,
makes a lot of sense.
You've got a structure, you've got an outline, you know what you're making, but it's like a sculptor that you've got a piece of marble, but you kind of chisel it up, but it's still sitting there. It doesn't look like anything to anybody else, but you know what it's going to be. And then comes in the hard work of kind of going to chisel it.
I love that. Is there a project that you would like to see you and Seth work on that hasn't touched your repertoire yet? Like, okay, I've done the sci-fi, I've done the Western, I've done the cartoon. Are you guys waiting for a musical or a rom-com or something?
I know when we had Seth on the show, we said, okay, you've won multiple Emmys, you've been nominated for Grammys, you've hosted the Oscars. When are you going to conquer Broadway, man? So are you guys going to do a Broadway play together?
I mention it now and then. We certainly love show music. We share that. I think he would write an amazing musical. He's got so many things going on. Sorry, that's my talking doorbell. He's got so many projects going on. I don't know when he'd find the time, but if he wants to do it, I'm there.
You're the guy. I love that. Clearly, he does.
I may not be the guy either. There may be better people than me, but I'll be there in any way I can to, I'll hold the door.
Well, I think it says something, though, to Mike's earlier point that, if you're also helping him compose his shows, I think that's really cool. I actually got to see him years ago perform with Sarah Bareilles in Los Angeles. My friend of mine's like, I have a ticket, so I'm like, great, we're going to go do that now.
I was conducting.
I had a feeling that was the case, so I was there. I was there really young.
At LA Live?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was the first record. That was a taping for a show to promote the first record.
Wow.
music.
Yeah, because they were filming it, right? I do remember that. I do believe.
Yep.
And I remember
and
being starstruck.
Showed on the Epic Network. Yeah, it was so great to get Sarah to do that. Oh my gosh, I adore her. She is just one of the world's best people and one of the world's greatest singers. And
such a great songwriter too. She just really, she's someone who clearly, from what little I know of her, she knew who she was and what she was going to offer the music industry. And really, even though she knows how to play the Hollywood game, she can still do her own. She can go on her own road, and I love that. It's a really nice icon.
Yeah, we've been lucky enough to do 3 or 4 things with Sarah, and every time we get in the studio, I'm just blown away by. She's just the most consistent singer. It's crazy. She never ever misses, and she's a dear, dear, dear person.
That's lovely.
Anything else you're working on that you'd like people to know about?
Well, we're working on some more recording projects going into the future. Some really exciting stuff that I can't talk about. And then I'm going to spend part of this year working on a project that I started before the pandemic. I've done a lot of projects and had a lot of fun working with Imagineering for the Disney company, and writing music for their worlds, sometimes their attractions, sometimes a whole world, and I really enjoy doing that. And I'm working on an attraction for the Tokyo Disney park, and as I said, I started it before the pandemic. Then the whole thing just kind of got stopped, and now it's picking back up, and we'll be finishing that this year.
That's
and
amazing.
You've been, I know we, when we introduced you, we said, and so much more, but your work with Disney goes back 40 years or so with Disney Television and the Tinkerbell movies and Mulan 2 and so much.
Yeah, the Tinkerbell movies were like 10 years of my life.
Oh my gosh.
Where I really did, other than working with Seth, I really did nothing else. And it was great. I started when my daughter was 7 or 8. And so, imagine being the guy writing the music to Tinkerbell. And we had a children's choir in the first movie. And I got her to come in and sing with the children's choir. I think we broke every rule. You're not supposed to hire your kids. But she came in, and I can hear her voice. She's got at the time, she had a distinctive little kind of voice. And when I hear that score, I can pick her voice out. So it's a great little time capsule. And it was, I did four movies and a bunch of other stuff. And it was fun to share that with her. Yeah.
It's got to be a magical memory for her, too, I think.
I think so.
I can imagine.
She always went to the premiere. She was always my date to the premiere.
I mean, it's Tinkerbell. That's like, you're the coolest dad. That's a career day. You just won.
Yeah.
That's so sweet. Well, I know I feel like we could have a whole nother conversation. I want to congratulate you on the release of this. What I think is one of the most exciting things about releasing the music is how excited people were for it. It's not just, oh, well, here goes this, CD. People might want to listen to it. It's also people are so hungry for the Orville, and which I really think is just a cool thing, because eventually season 4 is going to get announced. It's going to, one way or another, something will happen. But it's so cool to see people excited and appreciative of the work you did, to the point where they're like, awesome, the soundtrack's out. So congratulations on that.
I'm so happy to hear that. As you say, we all swung for the fences. And, the one thing I didn't mention about the soundtrack, it's great that people are appreciating it. I'm really grateful for that. And the thing I need to mention is, Seth made sure we had resources that pretty much no television show has ever had, the kind of horsepower we had. It was regularly 80 to 90 players, sometimes more. And to have that palette to work with, which, even big budget features now sometimes don't have the budget for that, to have that on every episode. And then these players, our colleagues here in Los Angeles are amazing on any given day. But it was really fun to see them come in and go, oh, we're going to be challenged today. Oh, I better look. Oh, there's some stuff to play here. All right. And you saw everybody kind of lift up and kind of lean in a little bit. And I think they sound just incredible. I think these players and this orchestra is just unparalleled.
That's pretty effing cool. I think that's pretty cool.
It is.
Yeah, there's a video from one of my sessions where that Seth shot and Tom and John Cassar all went out. We were dead in the water. Here's one final story for you.
Oh, great. We'll take it.
This was during COVID, and we were dead in the water because my fourth trumpet player had showed up to the gig. You have to get a COVID test the day before and the day of. And he had tested negative the day before, and he showed up the day of with a high fever. And even though he had tested negative, he said, they have a COVID officer there, and they said, I'm sorry, you can't come in. And the music I had written, I really did need 4 trumpets. It wasn't just a throwaway fourth. It was really integral to the sound. So we couldn't do anything. We called somebody, and he was on his way. And he got there quickly. He got there within an hour. But then he had to be COVID tested with a PCR test that took 3 or 4 hours to get the results. So he was just sitting in the green room waiting to be okayed to come into the room. So I thought, all right, we're stuck. We can't record anything, but we can rehearse. So we spent those 3 hours just going through everything and rehearsing and massaging and getting all the nuances down. And towards the end of that, where we were just, we're kind of done. We've rehearsed everything. What do you want to do? Seth said, let's make a video. And, that cue where, they're flying into Earth. Let's do that again. And so Tom and John, they all, if you look in this video, you'll see them like walking around in the room in the corners. And they shot the thing, and then Tom did a great job of editing it all together. And now, actually, I think Tom posted it. They had to blur out the
I sort of
the
remember
Orville.
this video.
Yes.
Yeah, they had to blur out the video because the shows hadn't aired. Now Tom has posted a kind of a split screen where you've now got the orchestra and then what we were scoring to below it. And it's a great peek into what our thing looks like, what an orchestral session looks like when you hear this glorious orchestra. Well, there's a lot of people there that, got up, had breakfast, and came, and many of them, all of them were wearing masks who didn't have to not wear masks, like wind and brass players. They couldn't wear masks,
right.
But you'll see the whole string section has masks on, and, it's just a real time capsule of a really interesting time.
Well, what is today, right? It's March 7th. It is almost 3 years to the day where everything shuts down. And I was just thinking about, it still feels like it was yesterday. And you still, almost everything you can talk to somebody about is the pandemic. But one of the things was really cool to learn from all of your colleagues was how important other people's wellness and how seriously COVID was taken on that set. So it is cool to see that it embodied in the work. And you guys are
no question. And they developed a protocol with Dr. Larry Brilliant for the set that enabled them to have, I think in one particular show they had like 200 extras. Nobody was able to do that, but because of this protocol they developed, we took that over to the orchestral side, and at that point, orchestras were not recording together. You would have the strings come in the morning, perhaps, then the brass in the afternoon, then the next morning, the woodwinds, and then in the afternoon, the percussion. Everybody separate, small groups, right? And we were the first production, I believe, that was allowed to come back as a whole in the same room at the same time, because Seth took that protocol that they had developed and brought it over to the music side and said, okay, we're getting everybody PCR tested 3 times. And then every day you come into a session, you're tested in the morning before the session. And they took it really seriously. And that first day, on that first session, they had been playing for a couple of years, not as a whole orchestra. They never heard what the whole thing sounded like put together. They would come in and do their parts and like, oh, this sounds kind of empty. And that first morning, you could see people looking around and laughing and high-fiving and cheering. Like, I think after the first read-through, there was a cheer that went up because finally we're together. We're back in the same room. And, it was kind of joyous.
I didn't know how much. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Just what a gift for all of us that you were able to get together, put this music together with such passion and such skill. And now we get to listen to it and enjoy it, and that process that you went through that Larry Brilliant put in place with Pan Defense just enabled you to do something during such a dark time that just was so amazing.
Yep. It really was kind of a bright light. And, it was enormously difficult for people, and it was enormously expensive to do all this testing. But, man, like I said, the joy of being able to get back to what you love to do, anything would have been worth it. All the inconveniences and whatnot of the testing.
Oh, my God.
I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful they did it.
People I don't think understood, a lot of people were missing their workplaces, but as performers or artists, not having that audience or having your synergy with an ensemble, until you did it again, you didn't realize how much you missed it, because we all knew how to make do, but it does make a difference. And obviously Seth values what you guys do. The shows, the episodes are amazing because of what you guys are capable of getting done. So that's some pretty great artwork there.
I'm glad. It was a labor of love for sure, and it really is fun to see it all come together. I had the best time because you're on this big ship, to put it one way, but I'm not seeing the whole story arc, and suddenly like episode 1 or 2 aired, and it related to something I did in 3 or 4, which I never really understood. And it wasn't until I got to see the story from 1 or 2, oh, well, okay, that's why this happened. And sometimes even all the way at the end in show 10, everything was set up from episode 1. So it was kind of cool being in your own little silo, not knowing the whole arc of the story. And then when those episodes you didn't work on aired, it was like now you're a fan, you're an audience member.
Yeah, then you get to enjoy it for the first time like everybody else does.
That's right.
God, it's also got to be its own set of challenges. So is there anything besides, the movie that we might not be able to say? Is there something you're working on right now that you'd like us to know about, or where they can get the CD if they haven't already? Or not the CD, but I guess the soundtrack.
Well, yeah, currently I'm working on American Dad, and we're working on some records. And so always keep an eye open for new records from Seth. We pretty much are working on something
all the time.
Always, yeah. And then I'll be going to Japan sometime this summer.
That's so cool. Is there a social media that you like people to interact with you on, that your preference?
Yeah, pardon me. I was on Facebook, and I left that, so I'm basically on Twitter now.
We are the last bastion of hope on that on that social media site.
I know it's getting discouraging.
What's your Twitter handle before we punch out?
Yeah, so it's Joseph MC.
All right, we got it.
All right.
Yep, we found you. Way to make it hard to find you. I love it. Well, this has been wonderful. Mike, why don't you wrap us out?
Mission Log of the Orville is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Technical production by the indelible Earl Green. Our website and your opportunity to comment and connect with us is podcasts.roddenberry.com. Look for another supplemental episode as we wait for the announcement of the Orville Season 4.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.